Genius Virginia Woolf was born in 1882 into an upper-middle-class, financially well-off family outside of London. Unlike her brothers, however, she was not sent to elite boarding schools, but homeschooled. Her brothers enrolled at King's College, Cambridge University, around 1900, but she did not. Women were not then admitted. In 1929, when Virginia Woolf penned A Room of One's Own, here it is again, she did not intentionally go in search of an answer to our question, why so few women geniuses? Instead, her aim was to answer a slightly different question. If women played such a prominent role in the history of English literature, think of Juliet, Cleopatra, and Lady Macbeth within Shakespeare alone, why then do we have no female English writers of consequence before around 1800? Did men really have a total control over creativity, what a woman thought and said? Apparently, yes. And here's what else Virginia Woolf discovered and reported in A Room of One's Own, as you can see by the following slide. Before 1800, women were given no education outside the home. A woman had no voice in the choice of a husband. Woolf says explicitly, quote, "The daughter who refused to marry the gentleman of her parents' choice was liable to be locked up, beaten, and thrown around the room," end quote. Wife beating was a recognized right of a man. Again, end quote. A woman could not own property. A woman usually did not sign her own literary works. Woolf's conclusion, and I quote, "As creative and political entities, women did not exist. It was impossible for any woman, past, present, or to come, to have the genius of Shakespeare. There would always have been this assertion, you cannot do this, you are incapable of doing that," end quote. The takeaway from Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own is, a room of one's own is a metaphor. It stands for opportunity, for education, and for an avenue to creative expression, for a place to work, and for the chance to earn money, money that allows for independence. What else is needed in addition to that room, says Woolf? Encouragement. Here's something a remark that I find particularly important. She says that men of genius, as she calls them, have had to triumph over indifference, but women have had to triumph over outright hostility and diminishment. How does this diminishment play out? How does it unfold? It happens through what Woolf comically calls the looking glass effect. Men need to be seen through a looking glass or a magnifying glass in order to be seen as more important than they really are. Here specifically is what Woolf says, quote, "Women have served all these centuries as looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. That is why Napoleon and Mussolini both insist emphatically upon the inferiority of women. For if they, the women, were not inferior, they, the males, would cease to enlarge. That serves to explain, in part, the necessity that women are to man." In other words, making women look small allows men to look big. So far, Napoleon and Mussolini have been mentioned here as misogynists, or at least as women diminishers. Napoleon, for example, did say, quote, "Women are nothing but machines for producing children." That doesn't sound like genius. Here are some other things that supposed wise men throughout the ages have said, men who should have perhaps known better. I offer the following quotes because they suggest what Woolf might have had in mind by way of hostility of males toward female genius. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the father of modern education, said, "In general, women don't like art, don't understand it, and have no genius for it." Poet George Gordon, Lord Byron, "They ought to mind home and be well fed and clothed, but not mixed in society. Well educated, too, in religion, but to read neither poetry nor politics, nothing but books of piety and cookery. Music, drawing, dancing, and also a little gardening and plowing now and then," end quote. No music? Here's what the famous political commentator, philosopher Dr. Samuel Johnson said about women composers. Sir, a woman's composing is like a dog walking on its hind legs. It's not done well, but you are surprised to find it done it all. And here's what genius Pablo Picasso said about dogs and women. Quote, there is nothing so similar to one poodle dog as another poodle dog, and that goes for women too. On and on we could go with these non-genius remarks, but you get the point. With this sort of hostility, what was a creative woman supposed to do? Perhaps go into the aforesaid female-friendly domain of the domestic novel? In a domestic novel, it was acceptable for a woman to write about things such as home and hearth. Women weren't supposed to know anything outside of the home, as Lord Byron explicitly said. But even as a female domestic novelist, it might be necessary for a woman to go into hiding, remain anonymous, by adopting a nom de plume, and so they did. All of Jane Austen's books, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, for example, were published anonymously or by a lady. Mary Shelley did the same thing with the first edition of her blockbuster, Frankenstein. On the screen, you see the images of names of 6 other famous female writers along with their pen names, arranged in no particular order. George Sand, Aurore de Devon. George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, A.M. Bernard, Louisa May Alcott. Currer Bell, Charlotte Bronte. Ellis Bell, Emily Bronte. And Daniel Stern, Marie Dagoul. Well, those were the good old days of the 19th century. 100 years later, things had changed, right? Toni Morrison, Pearl Buck, both of whom won Nobel Prizes, published under their own names, as do Margaret Atwood and Joyce Carol Oates today, for example. So, pseudonyms are not needed anymore. Well, if so, why did Nella, or Nellie Harper Lee, drop the Nellie, leaving behind the masculine-sounding Harper Lee? Why did Joanne Rowling, Phyllis Dorothy James, and Erica Mitchell think it necessary to become J.K. Rowling, P.D. James, and E.L. James? Rowling was told by her literary agent, Christopher Little, that she would sell more of her Harry Potter books if she disguised herself as a man. So perhaps things haven't changed that much. And that agent, Christopher Little, was probably right in his assessment of bias against women. For example, in 2015, American writer Catherine Nichols published the results of an experiment in which she sent out a draft of one and the same novel to male and female literary agents and editors soliciting interest. The material sent out under the name of a male author garnered 8 times the number of positive responses as did the same material sent out under the name of a female. Ironically, the females in the survey responded in the same negative fashion toward women submitter as did the males. Today in the publishing business, editors and agents are more than 50% female. So perhaps this is an example of what Mahzarin Banaji at the Harvard Business School calls blind spot bias. Perhaps men have been so successful in brainwashing women, a tall, strong white male carrying a briefcase must be super superior, that they too have come to believe what men have been telling them all along, saying to women in effect, you cannot be a genius. You are less capable. The game of genius begins with education. Without formal education or self-taught education, there is no genius. Although universities had been around since the year 1200, the first woman to receive a university degree, Elena Piscopia, did not do so until the year 1678, nearly 500 years later. Women were not admitted to German universities until the late 19th century, and then only if they remained behind a curtain. The first woman to be admitted to a medical school in the United States and thereafter become the first female doctor was Elizabeth Blackwell in 1849. In the arts, women were not admitted to the Paris Conservatory of Music until 1793, but even then they had to enter through a separate side door, and they could not study musical composition, creativity being deemed beyond their limited capacity of understanding. Again, in Paris, women painters were not admitted to the state-sponsored School of Fine Arts until 1897. But they still couldn't enter anatomy classes, the one sort of foundational instruction absolutely necessary to a painter. By 1903, as you can see on the slide, they had been admitted, so long as the subject, the male model, was at least partially clad. Moving to more modern times. In 1960, Harvard had one female full professor, astrophysicist Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin. Yale and Princeton had none. Women did not gain entrance as undergraduates to Princeton and Yale until 1969. And although women could attend Harvard classes as enrolled students at Radcliffe College beginning in the 1960s, Harvard did not officially merge with its sister school until 1999. 30 years before, the dean of freshmen at Harvard College, Francis von Stade, had issued this cringeworthy statement, quote, "Quite simply, I do not see highly educated women making startling strides in contributing to our society in the foreseeable future. They are not, in my opinion, going to stop getting married and or having children. They will fail in their present role as women if they do," end quote. Apparently not much had changed. Let me end this segment by invoking an insightful statement on this point. It comes from Sophia Tolstoya, the wife of genius Leo Tolstoy, author of War and Peace. She bore him 13 children. She also served as his copyist, agent, and critic. In this photo, she looks on admiringly as his helpmate, but she too was a writer. Yet husband Leo refused to read anything that she wrote. Here's what Sophia Tolstoya had to say about genius. Quote, "I have served a genius, Tolstoy, for almost 40 years. Hundreds of times I have felt my intellectual energy stir within me and all sorts of desires, a longing for education, a love of music and the arts. And time again, I have crushed and smothered these longings. Everyone asks, but why should a worthless woman like you need an intellectual or artistic life? To this question I can only reply, I don't know, but eternally suppressing it to serve a genius is a great misfortune," end quote. A great misfortune indeed.